Welcome to our broadcast. For 5 decades, 50 years, photographer Richard Avedon has captured political leaders and celebrities in stunning portraits that reveal more than they flatter. He has a rare gift for catching the private side of public figures. And though through his eyes we see familiar faces in ways we don't expect, as staff photographer for the New Yorker magazine, he's introduced portraiture to its pages. In the late 1940s, he revolutionized fashion photography, and he remains on the cutting edge to this very day. His work changed the very definition of beauty. Models need not be physically perfect. They have got to be human, not mannequins. In his new publication and autobiography, he shows us a lifetime of insight into the culture, the power, and the aesthetics of our times, and we are pleased to have him here. Welcome.
Thank you.
Oh, it's great to see you. Thank you. This is some book here. I'm just going to show you briefly this, just to give you a sense of it, because there's something I want to do here. You call it an autobiography because what? Because there's almost no text.
I think I've been arrested on the visual level. I think that, how did it start? How did the world start? There was light.
Yeah.
There was nothing else. And all of and then a while later, mountains and rivers and people. All our impressions of the world are formed, I think, before words. The terror of falling out of the crib, of starvation, of a breast that you want that rams into your mouth. You're out of control. And you begin to form who you are according to your relationship to these things that are pre-verbal. And I think a part of me was arrested on that level, and being arrested developed it in the way that blind people hear so much better than we do. That's very often, or in the way that you compensate for any. And I think I overdeveloped my visual sense. I can read from you. I mean, it's shocking what goes on in my mind looking at you at this moment, looking at you every night on television. I know when you're tired. I know when you've had troubles.
God.
I mean, Charlie, I really just sit there, and sometimes the words just, my friends know that
I could call you up at the end of a show and say,
what
and you
happened
could
to
tell
me
me
today?
what my day was like and what I'm going through.
Pretty much. Maybe not with
Well, speaking of you, sir,
Yeah.
why is this the first image that I see in this
Well,
book?
could you guess?
Yeah, here's what I guess.
Okay.
I guess it shows that the precariousness of it. You're sort of above everything else, but at the same time, it's very precarious.
Right,
and
it's
you don't
the
know,
artist.
and you
It's
might fall.
any artist, not necessarily above the crowd,
Yeah.
but on shaky feet, but apart.
Yeah.
Above implies a relationship to the people below. I think that man on stilts is a really good way of describing who I am. Really shaky, but watching.
If I read it, it would go through all of this, page by page. I come away with what understanding and insight into you. A life lived as an artist. Your own what?
I mean, I could be really off about this, but I've organized the book. I couldn't possibly have done this book 20 years ago, 10 years ago, or almost 5 years ago.
Why not?
I had to have a lifetime of images. An image can be a word, it can be a sentence, it can be possibly a paragraph. But it cannot be a chapter. It cannot be. It's just that I've gathered this dictionary, this vocabulary of images. It took 50 years to do some of them earlier.
Yeah. Well, let me come back to that. An image, a photograph, has certain limitations. It can be a paragraph, an expression, a phrase, but it can't be a chapter.
That's right.
You can't read too much into a photograph? What do you think?
No, I'm limited. I've
one
never felt that there was a single photograph that said everything or even half of what I knew about the subject.
Yeah.
You get an aspect of it. You get a certain moment. You can deepen it a certain level. But what I really know can't get into one picture. But when you have a lifetime of photographs, then I've tried to organize them in a way, almost cinematically. So that
Not chronologically.
Not chronologically, because I think I've written this in a little introduction, that I don't think we live chronologically. I don't know about you, but I find myself, when I was a very young man, I had wisdoms and insights that were way ahead of my experience. And today, the baby Dick, I mean, I can be reduced to being 13 or pre-adolescent or adolescent like that. So I think we don't really live chronologically. I think that we respond out of chronology. It's all there in the head. And so that particularly with these images, I put them together out of chronology, but toward a certain kind of meaning. The book is organized symphonically. I think it's symphonically. In movements, 3 movements. You open with your beginning and establish the themes. You develop them in the second movement, and in the third movement, recapitulate and deepen and show what everything was really about. Okay, it's a kind of fiction about my life. You can't say that any autobiography is the truth, but it's the way in which I have felt.
Why can't you say any autobiography is the truth?
Because there's no such thing as truth. Truth of this moment isn't true. I'm performing for you. I want to be good on your show. I want you to...
And I want you to be good.
And you want me to be.
I want to bring the best out of you.
I know what you're doing, and what you're doing with me is what I've done with the people who posed for me.
Exactly right.
We are very similar in what we have to accomplish in a limited amount of time.
I told somebody that today. I said, you know, Dick says that what I do is what he's doing. You're looking, and it's a performance, and there's an engagement. And there is something happening, and we're both looking for something to bring out the right moment.
Exactly. And that doesn't mean we're not natural. We're thrown, if you're thrown into a race, you run it, right? And you use everything you have to win, or to do it well.
And what separates the best at what you do? I mean, what makes the best? What do the geniuses have?
I have no idea.
You don't?
No.
No one does?
I can't say that, but I know for myself that I can't parse out my life or my career and I mean, nobody deserves.
Take the 3 or 4 photographers that you really admire. Photographers.
Cartier-Bresson.
Cartier-Bresson, right. Okay, it's easy.
Yeah.
You know, that's easy. What does he have that you have? Or without comparing yourself to him, what is it about him?
I think there's one thing that Cartier-Bresson, that Irving Penn, that Diane Arbus, all have that I share is a complete obsession with work. With work and work every day. If you do work every single day, the work hopefully gets better. At the end of your life, you have a body of work. Or the end of a month, you have a body of work. If you did 2 interviews, Charlie, that wouldn't be Charlie Rose. That wouldn't be what you're going to have when it's done. You've documented a time in our history.
Which is a chronicle of our time in the same way that your work is a chronicle of our time.
And you get better and better and better at it because it's like muscles that you know, if you do enough push-ups, eventually there's a little something going on there.
Right. But what interests me, too, is this notion that that everybody I have ever interviewed, if I take that whole range of people and people talk, what do you see in them? Those that are at the best at what they do are obsessed by work. I have yet to meet anybody who is world class who is not obsessed by her work or his work.
So the question is?
There's no question, it's just an observation. That their passion for work defined, regardless of how much genius God gave you or you developed.
So it's a kind of flight into reality. It's a kind of, possibly, and I can only speak for myself, that if I didn't have my work and the love of it and the excitement of it and the fact that the worst assignments interest me, I don't think I would have done very well in the world. I don't think I would have been good at anything else. I think it's a lucky break that I had this visual sense. There's a story that I've been telling recently that I didn't remember. Does that ever happen to you? Something comes back from way back.
They tell me, interesting thing, I'll tell you that, they tell me that people who write their autobiography all of a sudden think, I'm not going to remember this. And then they get into it. Michael Caine was here. He said, all of a sudden you find out that your memory is much stronger than you remember it, than you imagine.
Memory. Absolutely. My father was a teacher, and he explained the principles of photography to me because the Eastman Kodak box Brownie was the big event in the mid-1920s when I was born, late 1920s. Every house had a box Brownie, and it was so exciting to take photographs. And my father wanted me to understand what a negative was, what light on a negative did, and how a negative then reversed the process and printed on a sensitized paper. And I was 9 years old. So he did it with a magnifying glass, and so I was burning the edge of the carpets off and setting the drapes on fire. And then I kept thinking, burning in. Now, I had this beautiful little sister. She was absolutely wonderful. And we photographed her all the time because she loved to pose, and she was so pretty. And I took a negative of my sister, and I taped it with, we didn't have Scotch tape, we had surgical tape in the house, onto my shoulder, went out in the sun, went to the beach actually, and spent the whole day. The sun burned through, and I peeled it off the next morning, and there was my sister on my skin. Now, as a metaphor, that's pretty hot.
Yeah.
So I think I was a photographer before I ever knew I was going to be a photographer.
But your father wanted you to be a businessman.
Yeah, anyway, he thought that he called life the battle. Because he grew up in an orphan asylum on the Lower East Side. His parents had come over from Russia. He was one of 7 children, and the youngest, and the only one who graduated college. He was brilliant. And he felt that to live in this world, which was the battle, you had to be physically strong, intellectually developed. There was one other thing that was impossible to me. All 3 were things that I couldn't possibly.
Probably get a good education. But
well, that's intellectually developed. Yeah, he had that, and there was some third. Some third thing.
But your mother was happy for you to be a creative endeavor.
Yes,
she was more comfortable with you doing that and had less concern about needing the security of a different kind of career, a more established career.
Exactly. She just loved artists. She was. Later in her life, at 76, she began sculpting in granite, and she's so she just was completely supportive. She's 94, and still humorous.
When she was 76, she started sculpting.
Absolutely, and sculpted until she couldn't stand. The dust got in of the stone. Dust of the stone got into her eyes.
When you left high school, you just dropped out, didn't you? Did you?
I didn't graduate.
You went
so I thought, do I go back for the humiliation of being the only member of the graduating class that didn't graduate? So I didn't go back.
Did it take you a while to grow out of that? I mean, this notion that you didn't go on to high school and college, or were you overcome by this notion that you met everybody and knew everybody and you were, self-learner?
I felt that I didn't know that I was learning on the job, so to speak.
And meeting everybody.
Yes, meeting them, but I never felt, for example, if I had photographed in those days, say Jean Renoir or Marian Anderson or anyone, if I went into a living room to a party and they were there, I thought they wouldn't recognize me. I mean, my relationship to them was never of equals in my own mind. I didn't feel any strength in myself until I was much, much older.
When did you find that? I mean, when did it come that you...
Rather mysteriously, but in the last decade, I think.
You went into the Merchant Marines. And began to do IDs, right?
Yes, exactly.
And did you know by then that photography was intriguing to you? I mean, you talked about being 9 years old and doing the whole thing with Louise.
I wanted to be a writer in high school. I was the editor of the high school. I was the poet laureate of New York City. I couldn't graduate. Couldn't pass hygiene, but I was the poet laureate of New York City and the co-editor with James Baldwin of the DeWitt Clinton Magpie, which was the best literary high school magazine, and thought I'd be a writer. And I realized at 18 that there was I could be dyslexic for all I know. There's something about concentration of a certain kind, education of a certain kind, that to this day I have to learn what I learn obliquely. I can't get a book, read it as you can, and come out with knowledge.
How do you learn? People talk to you, you experience it yourself?
Just through experience and through enthusiasms and following those enthusiasms.
You came back and you went to work for Harper's Bazaar, and you're soon off taking pictures in Paris. I mean, this was fashion photography.
Right, exactly.
Was this what you wanted to do, or is this just what was available?
My father had a woman's specialty shop. It was called on Fifth Avenue. It was called Avedon's Fifth Avenue. And Harper's Bazaar, Vanity Fair, and Vogue were in the house every month because they had to be kept up to date with what was going on in the fashion business. So I saw the most beautiful photographs by Munkachi, by Steichen, by Bruhl, of theater and of fashion. And the ones I liked, instead of putting baseball players' Dixie cup tops on my wall, I just tore them up and Scotch taped them onto the wall, and I was surrounded by the great photography of the 30s. As a sort of a visual influence. So it seemed, and in a family of mostly women, I was very aware of the fragility of themselves in relation to their looks, in relation to men.
That you went to Paris then, and who was a great art editor? Bradovich? What was
Bradovich.
Bradovich was a great, and Alec Lieberman was over at Vogue,
At Vogue, right,
and Penn was at Vogue, and
That's right.
And you were at Harper's Bazaar. In the 40s in Paris, what did you do different that people hadn't seen before? What is this notion of revolutionizing?
It didn't feel, nothing I've ever done has been calculated. It comes out of some instinct. It comes out of, for instance, I thought this morning when I woke up, how am I going to speak to Charlie Rose for 1 hour? I have nothing to say. There is nothing I can say. Here I am. I feel great.
Right.
So that's exactly the way in which I enter the world of photography and fashion photography. I follow my enthusiasm. You get to Paris, the beautiful. At the beginning, I could only, back in New York, I could only photograph friends, girls, who were girlfriends and who knew one another. I couldn't face those extraordinary women who were the famous models of the time. But what I did was photograph what I enjoyed. So that was a period when models were posed against Greek columns in Greek dresses, posing and lit artificially, and I'd see these girls walk into the studio or walk down the street, and boy, do they look good to me.
Exactly.
And then
it had a certain grace and elan, not the way they walked and moved.
Exactly, and I could take that. That's one of the things I do, and probably one of the things you do, is to push it further. You don't change. In other words, I was sort of known for these long-legged Susie Parker striding down Madison Avenue. One day, I walked down Madison Avenue, and I saw women, short, fat women, tall, skinny women, walking like Susie Parker walked, and like the other women in my...
Meaning that what they saw influenced them.
They had seen Harper's Bazaar, and they started to walk down the street like models. And those models were my models, and full of vitality and life, and heads up, and a kind of attack on the world and joy in the day. That came just naturally. I wasn't burdened by the whatever you call it, the way in which establishment.
Right. Now, was there anything about you then that said, I want to do more than this? I want to be a different kind of photographer?
No, that's one of the misconceptions about me. I started doing photo reportage, journalism of a kind, in lockstep with my fashion work. If you look at the book, you will see that in 1949, I was up in Harlem. I was going to do a book of Harlem doorways that James Baldwin was going to write the year we got out of high school.
You two remained friends throughout his life?
No, not at all. Okay. He was difficult.
Right.
But we did collaborate on that one book at the time of the Civil Rights Movement.
So you photographed these doors?
I almost did, but it didn't come about. But in the Merchant Marine, I certainly wasn't doing fashion. I was doing ID photographs, doing journalism, and the pictures that I did in 1949, Life magazine assigned an entire issue of Life to me on the subject of New York City, and that was, I mean, for a kid of 23 or 4, whatever I was, it was an amazing assignment, and they gave me, I think, $25,000. In those days, that was a fortune. I closed my little studio, and I started to work for 6 months. At the end of the 6 months, I looked at the pictures and said, no, this isn't it at all. This is a tradition that I'm entering a tradition that's already established. There was Helen Levitt and Lizette Modell and the Walker Evans and Paul Strand, and if I enter that world, it's their world I'm entering. I think I've got to
duplicating what someone else is doing,
or developing it. And go ahead.
Yeah. So you set it aside?
Put all the pictures away, and
said to Life magazine, sorry, but I'm not going to complete this.
I sent the check back, and I said I can't do it.
This was $25,000 at the time.
You
was
bet.
It a big something like that for a photographer?
More money than I'd ever seen.
Yeah.
You know, I gave the check back. Thank God I hadn't spent it, and. Never looked at the pictures for maybe 40 years until a few years ago when I thought, now I have to go back and see all of my work, every time this finger did that. And yes, planning the autobiography, I better see it all, and began to find in the work that I'd done images that developed into my fashion photography. So the fashion pictures you're speaking of women on the streets were done with women.
Ordinary women in Harlem and other places around New York, and you saw them juxtaposed against
nothing. Their environment.
Right.
I mean, there was a woman in an automatic walking down the street, and there were beautiful women. There's one man who's a shoeshine man. His legs are crossed. He has narrow ankles, and his legs are crossed like Dovima, the great model of the 50s. So I saw elegance and I saw beauty in a photojournalistic way, and then found that that and more complicated things could get into the fashion
You
world.
do less fashion photography now. You do Gianni Versace,
Yeah,
and that's
yeah.
about it. I mean, there's something here. I think that's in here. Look at this, folks. This is America. This is the new. This is New York Magazine for
The New
October
Yorker.
11th.
The New
New
Yorker.
Yorker. I mean, the New Yorker. Yes, I better get that right. The New Yorker. And this is this Seymour? What's her
That's
name?
Stephanie
Stephanie
Seymour.
Seymour. This is all new. Look at this. Do you get as much satisfaction from
it's
this
a joy. It's like
as you
going,
do from everything? In other words, I can't sit here and say, listen, I know Dick Avedon, and what he really likes is all this photojournalism. He likes being at the wall when he claps. He likes the portrait tours. He likes this other
in
stuff.
the way that you adapt yourself and use different parts of yourself.
Right.
If you were sitting with a very painfully shy person, you wouldn't be talking like that.
Exactly.
Right? So that there are parts of myself
So
that
you know too much about me.
well, there are parts of myself that I can draw. I'm very fortunate that in the way that an artist could do sets for the theater, could do costumes, could do oil paintings, watercolor sketches, I'm free to express myself infinitely better than I do with words, with a camera.
Right.
Doing fashion photography, doing the pictures you just saw.
Yeah. I want to just hold
First
these up
of
one more
all,
time as you
the
talk about it. Look
enthusiasm.
at
You
this.
open up the
All right,
whole
you got to do it the
thing.
whole way.
Right,
Listen.
okay. It'll show.
She is a beautiful woman.
Isn't she something? Fashion photography has a great deal to do with the woman
Can you see this, guys? Yeah, go ahead.
I'm photographing. And I found in Stephanie, fortunately, a perfect person to express the range of her moods in these pictures. She has, first of all, a model has to have perfect ability to show clothes.
Yeah.
And then, for me, there has to be the complexities, the things that I know about that have to do with the layering of what it is to be a beautiful woman, the vulnerability, the isolation.
Do you have to be attracted to them? I'm stealing this question in part from Diane, who asked you. Saw you a piece on Primetime Live.
Attractive, but not in an obvious way. Of course, to photograph someone you have no interest in, if you photograph someone...
There's no inspiration.
There's no inspiration. But Stephanie wrote me a note, picks up the telephone. She's a person, and she thinks about the photograph, as did all of my great models, and she sort of gives herself completely to a city and invents as a collaborator. It's great when it's a collaborative thing on the deepest level. I think I could. She's sort of like photographing an actress. I think we could do anything with Stephanie Seymour.
Now take a look. I want to mention. I'm showing these. We're going to look at some of them from this book. You've been so nice to have us, but to give us some of this. But take a look at this was done for Rolling Stone magazine in 1976. All right. These are a whole series of photographs. Tell me what this portraiture is about.
Okay, portraiture can be about any
Here
number.
you are. There's George Bush in 1976, who was then, I guess, CIA director. wasn't he?
Director of the CIA, yeah.
Yeah. All right. What's this about?
Well, the first thing, when I do a portrait, I have many choices to be completely subjective, balance subjectivity with objectivity, or completely objective. This was an election year, so it meant, and the assignment was to do the power elite of this country. So that means there are bankers, there are Rockefellers, there are Kissingers, there are union heads, there are everyone from Cesar Chavez to Meany. To tip it cheaply in any direction or illustrate a text was very, very dangerous. I have no feelings about these people. I have no deep feelings about politicians.
So what are you trying to reveal?
In this case, I pulled back and let whatever they wanted to show. And it's amazing what sort of came out of that. Whereas in the American West, I chose people who expressed, or most recently, as sitting with Antonioni, the film director, faces that express something deep in myself. Right.
Yeah, all right. Tell me, I'm going to go back to in the West in a second, but tell me about Antonioni, because he can't speak, right?
I've seen his face for years and wanted to photograph him for years, because there is always a face that, it's very hard to put this, that expresses my feelings about the human condition and what I'm drawn to. human condition is a little big word for this, but I'm drawn, as one is drawn to certain kind of, man is drawn to certain kind of women and vice versa, I'm drawn to certain kinds of faces, certain kind of vulnerability, intensity, layering, and I've watched Antonioni. I've asked him to pose a number of times, and it was never possible. He wasn't here when I was there, and I knew that this man was made to be photographed by me, and I was in Rome, arranged the sitting, and had heard then that he had had a stroke. So he came with the most beautiful woman, his wife, young wife, and I couldn't tell what he understood from me. I mean, he looked at the book, I showed him the book, and he goes, "Che brutto," "Oh bella," and it was so, it was so empty of so I thought that it was difficult for him to express himself, and I didn't know if he understood me. So I turned to the wife, and this is something I would never do. If I were photographing you, I would do exactly what I'm doing now. I would talk to you in this way until I saw on your face what I wanted, and then click. But I couldn't do that with him.
A moment that reveals rather than conceals.
Well, I don't know what it reveals. A moment that connects to what I'm looking for in you, and it's not really
so
about
the photograph is about you as the photographer, not about me as the subject.
I think so, and yet I can't do it alone. It has to be a collaboration. I'm always limited and released by the subject. It's a strange collaboration. The control is with the artist, the photographer, always. So I asked the wife of Antonioni if she would just, and this is the vulgarity of this sentence, to say to a man of his intelligence and his sensibility, could he just express on his face what he feels about this whole life he's lived and what he's going through now, and whether it's ironic or just whatever he feels about at this point in his life, about his life. I mean, you can't say that to a human being, but say it to Antonioni. I mean, with his gift as a director, two arch directors, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I would have done anything to help him, and I think he did everything to help me. The picture, I don't have it here, but it is so beautiful.
And what does it express, how he feels about himself
a kind of
at the end
sardonic, well, there are two pictures. One with his wife, in which she took his hand, held his hand, and put it down close to her crotch, and looked up at him. She's gorgeous. I mean, she's like out of one of the early Antonioni Fellini movies, that kind of innocence and sexuality. And he turned to the camera with an ironic look on his face, like, and here it is. Here it is. It's beautiful.
And the other photograph? The
other photograph is without the ironic look, not relating to her, and just some sort of sad half smile about. I mean, you can't. I don't have the words. I wish I had the pictures here to show you.
Let me take a look at some photographs, and we'll talk about some of these things here. The first picture is tell me about the photograph.
Of the Kennedys.
Right. This was 1960, 59, 60?
The inauguration.
Yeah, 60.
Yeah, 60.
61, actually.
61, that's right. I had been asked by Harper's Bazaar and by Mrs. Kennedy to photograph just before the inauguration, after the election. So he was the president-elect at that time. It was in Palm Beach,
right.
And everybody was busy, but you can imagine what it was like, and they took the time to pose for these pictures in this golden moment.
Now, you remained friends with the Kennedy family throughout?
Not really, no. We're acquaintances.
Yeah, because in the New York Magazine, which I should have here somewhere, the new New York Magazine, this one, you got other pictures here of this is from the New Yorker. Here is Eunice Shriver, the president's family. Why did you do this? Tell me about this. I'm showing this here.
Well,
I'll come back
again,
to it. Go ahead.
Go ahead. If you go back to Rolling Stone, this is such a time bomb of political pros and cons, of scandals, of all stuff that doesn't interest me. Let alone be romantic and sentimental about Camelot doesn't interest me. I was much more interested in the way people deal with the passage of time, the loss of power, people who have been close to power, and what happens on their faces 30 years later.
Is there in your judgment, you can capture their true being and sense of self?
You know, Charlie, true being,
all right, I know
sense
that's
of
a bad
self.
word. All right,
no, it's not a bad word. It's just that I don't believe in the truth of anything.
I know.
I think I get a little edge on something.
Yeah. You have said a photograph is accurate, but it is not
the truth.
the truth.
That's right. It isn't the truth. It's my truth of the day, and the truth of this day is not the truth of 10 years before.
And when some people see these photographs of themselves and they say it's a white background, it's your camera, you catch them at a certain moment, at a certain angle, and they say it's cruel.
Well, I don't know what cruelty has to do with art, and what this is not a mugging. This is a picture. I mean, I came here today and someone said, please go into makeup.
Yeah.
I said, makeup? Are you crazy? And they said, no, we're not crazy, but a little shine. But this is what I look like.
Right.
I don't want to look better than I look. I mean, look at the back cover of the book.
Right.
That's me. I treated myself as I feel about myself. Maybe not as I look on your television screen now. I don't know what that looks like.
Yeah.
But to me, the thing itself is so much richer, so much more complicated, so much more ennobling than the picture of my father on the piano that we call Smiling Jack Avedon.
Tell that story, okay, because your father is dying of cancer, and you photograph him dying of cancer.
Well, no, the mistake is that I photographed him. He died, the cancer took over in the last 2 years of his life, and I started photographing him 5 or 7 years before he died. As a way, with fathers and sons, and that, I don't know about you, but just sort of never ends, right?
About me.
Right, okay, it never ends. And I felt that I had been a spear carrier in an opera called Daddy. Right, and I wanted so desperately, my own son was growing up, maybe around 10 to 13, and I wanted to make some connection. I wanted him to know, as he was so old, who I was. And I wasn't who he was. And everything, I'd gone into business with him. He'd retired to Florida. We bought a swamp called Havana Heights. and he'd call up in the middle of the night and say, Dick, marinas are hot. He was in his 80s. So I mean, it was really great, except he didn't have a clue. He was very proud of me, but he didn't have a clue as to who I was. And I thought that maybe if I photographed him, and if he knew that it wasn't a snapshot of himself and his second wife, Eleanor, that it wasn't just a Polaroid or that it was my work. And so I started doing, every time I went to Sarasota, I did portraits of him. And the wonderful thing about it is that when I photograph Stravinsky, it's over in an hour, and he's gone and I'm gone, and that's the end of it. But what happened with my father was that he learned over the years, over 7 years of sittings, thousands and thousands of photographs.
When Dick came to visit, he had his camera.
And I started with an 8x10 camera to be sure it was serious, And I brought a writer with me who interviewed him, and I made the thing as formal as possible so that he could understand this was work. But then what happened is he really understood it. He learned that he could say that your microphone is my lens. Yeah. He could talk to me and look into the lens and have an absolutely natural conversation with me and never look in my eyes, which meant he was looking into the camera, therefore out at the audience, with a quality of emotion that no one I would meet of an afternoon could possibly give me. So it was a wonderful and very long, extended experience right through to his death.
Yeah, but then he was dying of cancer, and you took some powerful photographs of him.
Yeah.
And you showed one of two of them to him.
Yes.
And
No, the pictures that I showed him were early on.
Okay. But he never saw the pictures of him dying?
He didn't see. I couldn't look at them.
So how do you explain the letter that you wrote him and felt like you had to write him, and he had it in his person when he died?
It was early.
His pocket.
After the third sitting, when he was quite well, my way of photographing certainly wasn't the way he perceived of himself. Right. He had a back-rack portrait on the piano in his business.
Smiling Jack.
Smiling Jack Avedon, looking great. And he said, I brought some pictures down, and he said, Dick, how could you do this to your father? These are when he was healthy. Yeah. He just had met Eleanor, and he was getting married at 85. And I wrote to him, because I didn't want him to not hear it, forget it, and I explained what I loved about him. That in his 80s, he was fighting as he'd always fought, that he had this avid for life.
Right.
and had never stopped to the day he died. I mean, when he was the weekend before he died, I said, "Come on, Dad, let's walk on the beach." And we walked, and he went over to total strangers. He said, "That's my son.
Yeah.
He's just come back from Paris."
Yes.
I mean, it was. So I wrote them this letter explaining the nature of my photography, what it was I was looking for, and why I photographed him in that way. That letter was in his jacket pocket years later, the day he died. He always had it, and from that moment on, he was released into, with no self-consciousness whatsoever, he got it.
Yeah, and
You know?
it's part of that saying, he likes me for what I am, not for what I'd like to be, because you tell this wonderful story of the time when your family took these snapshots growing up, you and your sister Louise and your parents, and you'd go find a dog, and you'd go find a house, and what you were saying, the family was saying, at that time, this is the way, well, it was a lie, and that what you're seeing is a lie, but it says something real about who this family wants to be and how they'd like to be.
In other words, that was not part of my father, that was part of my mother.
Right.
It was a big event to have photographs in the house.
Yeah.
She would say, "We're going out to take photographs," and I'd get dressed up.
Yeah.
So we'd all get dressed up.
You create something unreal.
And then we'd borrow these dogs.
Yeah.
I mean, there's one family album, and in one year there were 13 different dogs in my arms or my sister's. And Packards that were in ours, and awnings of Fifth Avenue apartment houses that we didn't live in. Yeah. But that was all keeping up the front. There was the battle, and there was the front.
All right, let me take some look here at some photographs. We'll run through this rather fast because I want to get a lot of them in because they represent an autobiographical life. This is a very handsome picture of Senator Ted Kennedy when he was in 1976, I guess.
Yeah.
Next picture. Rose Kennedy taken when she was, what, 100?
No, I think it was 76.
76, so that was 20 years ago, 18 years ago. She's 100. Now tell me the story about Kissinger. Keep on the picture. Kissinger says to you, "Be kind."
He walked in, he had a minute to give me, and said, "Be kind." I didn't know what he meant. I mean, of course, I guess I did. But to me, it brings up all the problems about the perception of what a photographic portrait is supposed to be.
Right.
It's supposed to be cosmetic. In most people's eyes, they want to look good.
Right.
But their idea of what's good, to me, is obliterated.
And your idea of what good
what
is
a good
what?
is the thing itself, is
the reality.
Yes. In other words, as close as you can come to what's on that face. I wouldn't want to retouch your face for a minute. You'd be boring, without those circles.
Right.
Because all the interest in your face, as I look at it, is what time has done. And
the ravages of time.
But they're great. I mean, kids aren't very interesting. They're just gorgeous, like little puppies.
Right.
Sable hair and beautiful. Right.
All right. The next picture. I should mention that these come from this 1976 Rolling Stone piece. That's Nelson Rockefeller there. Next picture is Daniel Patrick Moynihan. Next picture is Clark Clifford. Next picture is Rosemary Woods. Next picture is Gerald Ford. Next picture is Jimmy Carter. Next picture, look at that there. So next picture is Ronald Reagan, and then George Bush.
Can you hold on?
Can you go back to Ronald Reagan?
Can you go back?
This thing have reverse here, guys?
Okay.
There you go.
I learned one thing. I didn't do this.
Yeah.
I learned one thing, that the right wing had stiff upper lips. All the right wing, if you look at Annenberg, all the Republicans, if you look at Reagan, if you look straight through the president of Coca-Cola, they have these tight upper lips. If you look at the liberals and the Democrats, like Muskie and like McCarthy, if we come to them, and there's a certain softness and a certain vulnerability that shows on their faces.
That's not just your political...
Not at all. I mean, I didn't tell them how to hold their lips.
All right. Okay, now we go to an autobiography. These are some of the Dick Avedon photographs from, and what's the next one? That's through Bush.
Yeah.
The next one is, what do we see here?
Well, we have Bette Midler facing some children in Trastevere in Rome.
This is in 1971.
Bette Midler is in 71, and I think the children are in 49.
Right. Next picture. On your left.
My little sister, I took that photograph when I was 9. She must have been 7. And on the
This
right,
with your little brownie?
That's with the box brownie. And then on the right, you have Giacometti, done in the 40s in Paris.
Right. Tell me about your sister, because she says important things about beauty, and a theme in here is about is beauty. I mean,
she was a fragile child and a very beautiful one, and the beauty became her beauty became the event of the house. And she was treated, I watched this happen. Now, I'm not sure of genetically to what degree she was vulnerable and fragile or what environmentally happened to her. But she was always dressed up like a little doll and always photographed. And I began to understand, as she sort of withdrew from the world, that there was she never knew if anyone was in there. I think this happens to a lot of great beauties, men and women. Do they walk into a room and is someone coming towards them because of the people they are or because of the skin they have and the way they look? And I think it's very confusing and very isolating as genius or as deformity.
Yeah, and so, and your mother said to her once about her, with your skin color and with your beauty, you'll never have to say a word?
You don't have to. She was shy, so my mother, not knowing really what was embedded in that, said, with skin like that, you don't have to say a word.
Go ahead.
Nothing. She just withdrew.
And you believe that that contributed to her own?
I don't know. You know, that's that kind of fortune cookie stuff about whether Louise, without the way she looked, I think would have become as ill as she did emotionally. I have no idea. It could have been genetic. But the fact remains that her beauty affected me. That I can be sure of.
In what way?
All of the models in the early years looked like Louise, the models I chose. Yeah, well, it's not there now, but there's a picture in the book where you can see that the oval faces, the high cheekbones, the brunettes, and all my first models were memories
of the beauty you saw and the memory you had of her.
Of Louise, yeah.
She died at age 42?
I think so, yes.
In a mental institution.
Yeah.
Next slide here, we move and change directions here a little bit. This is Rudolf Nureyev on the left, and Gus Grissom on the right. Tell me about these. Anything to say?
The juxtapositions in this book are very varied. Yeah. Sometimes they have to do with meaning. Sometimes, mostly they have to do with emotional. It's not. I mean, one would say, "Oh, look, both of them airborne. Yeah. One flies in the theater, one flies into the space." Right, and that's not why they're together. They're together? Because there's a kind of emotional power about those two faces, and one next to the other. The beauty of Nureyev, and then the intensity of Gus Grissom. It's interesting that, it's a sort of a side effect that Grissom was the astronaut who died, and that it's not about that. It's about something I feel when I turn the page. Sometimes those spreads are very graphic, and that's the reason. And then if it's too graphic, you lose the emotional thrust. Yeah, sometimes they're funny, like I think Kissinger and Allen Ginsberg. Yeah. But that isn't because they're from different sides of the political spectrum. That's just at that moment in the book you needed a little comic relief.
Next photograph.
In the tone of the book.
Yeah.
Yeah, like that. You know.
Yeah, that's comic relief.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a real knee snapper.
Dorian Lee and Vladimir Horowitz.
Right.
Next slide. This is
my first wife, Doe, and my grandson, William.
Next slide.
And if that has any meaning, that you can see in this the graphic connection between Dovima's arm and elbow and the cloth going across my father's face. And there is also, you see, any way of putting this into words demeans it. So I could say fighting death by dressing up, by developing this carapace against the world. My father's not dead in that picture. He had just come out of an operation. And I'm moved by that juxtaposition. I don't find it shocking. I find it to be just the way I feel about the world. You go out there, anything can happen. You walk down Madison Avenue and there's someone lying there dying of AIDS, and someone is shopping, and a bus goes by and people rush out. I mean, it's just, the world is...
But explain to me this about you, which is to know you and to know of you, there is an optimism about your life. There is a sense of energy and passion, and if I look at where you are at age 70,
There is, you've got a new book contract with Random House. You're writing a new book called Evidence. You're doing a thing about the 1960s. You're doing a book on fashion. You've got all this projects. I mean, you've got to be optimistic about life to be doing all that you are.
I think I am an optimist who's completely pessimistic. In other words, I think there's no way out of this. We're all in the boat together. We do the best we can for the people around us, for the people in the boat. You take the right side of issues, at least what you think is the right side of issues. You're loyal to your friends. You live as good a life as you can, knowing, in the existential sense, that there's dust after it's over. So you might as well make every day pay. But it's not conscious. It's my natural... these two conflicting qualities in me, depressive and completely ebullient.
And to understand you is to understand that both of them are at play.
That's right.
Yeah. But you have something unique. You know that when you go to dust, you're going to leave a record, and somebody, somewhere, may be influenced by what you have done. And they may say they may see or feel a connection.
To someone less alone.
That they're not alone.
That's right. I mean, I lived across the street from the museum, the Metropolitan Museum, when I grew up, and I spent the life in that museum looking at paintings and doing my homework, because it was empty in those days. Nobody went to museums in New York. They're sort of popular entertainment now. And I would look at paintings and see certain paintings and think, that guy understood something. Gee. Maybe someone...
and maybe a photograph.
I didn't see many photographs.
I know, but you're saying maybe a photograph of yours
we'll do
might
that
say that
for someone else.
May say that guy understood and give him a connection. I'm not alone. If I feel this way, he probably felt that way because that's what that photograph says to me.
You got it.
Whitney Museum.
Yeah.
A whole retrospective of your work. And some will say, and the point has been made, is photography art? Well, and you know what they say.
Yeah, listen, that is such a bogus and nitwit thing to ask. Anything you do as an art is an art. Painting is not an art if it's done by a schlub. Right. You know, bad painting is not art, bad writing is not the art of writing, and bad photography is not art. Good cooking, good parenting, good photography, good painting, good journalism. What you do, you bring it up to an art.
And so photography is art if it's done
anything
well
done
and with
to
craft
the level
and
of
experience and vision and insight.
That's right, exactly. Can I have a sip of that coffee?
Yes, sir. Help yourself. All right. Let me take some more photographs here because I have a lot of stuff I want to talk about. We got through to Marilyn Monroe. This is it. There's a self-portrait.
Yeah.
Now, why do you have these two juxtaposition like this?
I wish I could answer it. It felt right. I had great sympathy for Marilyn, great understanding of what performance was about and what I was in relation to her. It isn't as if I thought it out, Charlie. Yeah. That's the thing that's so difficult. You want it to be rational. You want me to make the case. Right. I can make the case. I put those pictures together and I thought, that's right.
Yeah. Now, is that what happens when you are looking through the lens of that camera?
Exactly.
You just see something, you say...
There's that instinctively, and then there is also making it happen, building. In other words, sometimes I don't speak at all. If I want a certain discomfort that I recognize in the person, if I want to heighten that.
If you want to create anxiety, you may not say anything and let them get more nervous.
But that's right, exactly. But most of this is done instinctively. I don't sit down in advance of a sitting and figure it out, except in rare cases.
But now, if you take the 7 years you spent about the American West, photographing the American West and the characters out there, and we must have some of these here, I'm sure, then that was different, though, because you chose them, and you almost chose them because they expressed some idea that you had rather than what they might express on their own.
Exactly. Now, so we have two things going. First of all, it was in the Reagan years.
Yeah.
Everything was wonderful, and I went out west.
Morning in America. Morning in America.
Absolutely, Morning in America. And I went out west to do this body of work because I knew that since I had never done the working man, I had done only the people I knew, power, entertainers, artists, fashion, that that my portrait of America would never be complete unless I attempted at least, and I certainly didn't think I could succeed at all. I went out there. There was no John Wayne. except in the Marlborough, as if they worshipped. The steel mills had folded. The farm, you know what happened to farming. You know what happened to the oil boom.
Right.
I went out, and those people in the book that are called drifters, they weren't drifting because it was fun. They were looking all over the West for the next job. And my heart was, broken. Also, the sense of there's something about people who are not, I've been so used to people who are aware of the camera and had a great sense of self-image. I never realized the depth that I could go to with people who were thrilled to be photographed. It wasn't boring
you want to
for
photograph
them.
me, they would say, almost.
That's right. You want to photograph me, and also I'm looking so dirty. And then I would say, look, I don't want to photograph you in your Sunday best. You have those pictures. I want to show in my pictures what you look like when you're working, when you're in waiting on table, when you're on the road.
And what do you think they thought about?
Well, you can't generalize, but there were an enormous amount of there was an enormous amount of response from not an enormous, but many friends that were developed through that loved it, that came to the show in Fort Worth when it first opened. They were proud to be photographed. The little boy who turned his daughter upside down.
Yeah.
And,
All right.
So it's very mixed. I'm so sure some didn't like them and some did.
Speaking of that, look at this. This is one of those photographs, I think. There you go.
Yeah.
Two of the pictures from, that's Bob Dylan on the left.
Bob Dylan
Yeah.
on the left when he was just early in his career,
And
then on the
Petra
right,
Alvarado.
Yes. Now there are three pictures in that. I wanted to make the point that all of these portraits were fictional. That one could photograph these people in many different ways, and I chose a certain way, which means that I made up simply by choosing from millions of people that I looked at fairs, at rodeos. I chose the face that expressed what I want, so that makes it a fiction immediately. But I wanted three obvious fictional photographs and metaphoric photographs. So there's the bee man, the snake boy, and Petra Alvarado. Yeah. So when you're down by the Rio Grande, the Mexican workers come over to work in the factories, the blue jean factories of El Paso, I think. And on their birthdays, it's sort of a Mexican tradition. It's not unlike the fair in Italian street fairs. Right. When it's your birthday, the owner of the factory pins a corsage, a plastic corsage, and in this case, two $20 bills. If you're really loved by the other workers in the factory, they just keep scotch taping dollars.
Petra Alvarado.
But what I had with her was a metaphor for why everyone has come to America from the beginning. That's why that should have been on the cover. Money. Okay. Should have been on the cover of the book.
All right, on cover of in the American West. Yeah. Okay, this is Malcolm X, which shows, you can see this here, Malcolm X, which shows, photographing the part of the Civil Rights Revolution and the portrait of a revolutionary. Next picture is Dwight David Eisenhower. And clearly you're saying here this is where he was at this time. This had to be in 1964. He had left the presidency in 1960. He was living in Gettysburg.
He was living on a golf course in Palm Springs, and he had had some sort of fibrillations in the night. And I was so surprised and moved by seeing this fragile man, frightened, and men in golf carts went by saying, "Hi, Ike," and then this devastating, painful grin would cross his face that was much more heartbreaking than the picture that I did.
Unbelievable that we're out of time. And autobiography.
This has been an hour?
It has been an hour. And so I wanted to talk, and I lost sense of the time, of the kinds of themes that you talk about in terms of relationships between the illusion of power, the illusion of beauty, and how sanity and madness are not that far apart, and all of those kind of things. So we'll have to do it another time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Pleasure, very much. Richard Avedon, and autobiography is in your bookstores and New York Magazine. He is the staff photographer. I thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.